that the key in understanding all of this is that there's a shape of the distortion. Not the ribs, right? Not the vertebrae, but it's like a shape in space that's the distortion. It involves the bow tie. It involves the chakra. It involves the etheric body, the luminous anatomy distortion, right? It involves the hourglass. And it's like all the parts are within it, be they hard or be they invisible, invisible to some, are all assuming that shape. So that everything we do to leverage and shift the structure to the shape is exaggerating the physical body to leveraging the physical body to exaggerate the distortion. Are we not? So if the distortion is high left, low right, we're talking about why do you side bend away from the high side when you do the correction for the high first rib. Well, if this is the vertebra, I think we've got a herniated disc here.
Surgery.
That'll be $10,000. So if this is a healthy, these are the ribs. This is the body of T1, right? They're not quite that way, but here we are. If we have a high left side and a low right side, look at the distortion. I'm posterior, you guys and the camera are anterior. Look at where we are, right? So obviously, if we're taking the vertebra above and the head to match this pattern of distortion, and I'm the head and the vertebra, if I don't exaggerate that, I'm going to side bend the head away from the high rib, and then rotate it toward, which is going to rotate the vertebra and release it from the back. And see, it's the exaggeration, right? It's why on C6, on the low side, why we side bend toward it and rotate away. That's it. It was a good ride. Thank you. Cool, huh?
Yeah. So you're going, this explains why you go the way it's trying to turn, the way it's been turned.
Yeah, we're exaggerating. This is an exaggeration procedure. We are matching the distortion. We only match the distortion energetically, right? We're actually doing it physically in this procedure. Cool, huh? Mm-hmm. And Reiko brings up something that I was hoping nobody would bring up. When we work with the ribs lower than the first rib, we're working with sort of a paradoxical thing. Why do we side bend and rotate toward the second rib anterior? That's low on the low side. I don't know. I mean, it really has to do with the uniqueness of the way the rib's constructed. But did anybody else say, that's really interesting. We're doing that this way. Right? It really has to do with the fact that the ribs sit in between the vertebrae. So if these are the vertebrae, these are the ribs. If a rib's low, it's pulled down. Right? So really to really understand that, you really want to spend a long time studying the mechanics of the ribs and the vertebrae and all these weird. I mean, there are 4 articulations of each rib into the spinal column. Right? Pammy, do like that. So here's a vertebra. Now let's flip you over like that. Here's a vertebra, right? Here's the body of the vertebra here. These are the transverse processes. There's a disc here, and there'd be one underneath it, just like that, right? So as the rib comes in from the side, it first has a joint where it has a joint on the transverse process of the rib, of the body of the vertebra, right? Which is the body, the transverse process of the vertebra. Then it has a joint on the bottom of the vertebra, that same vertebra. Then it has another joint on the top of the body of the vertebra below it. Then it has a joint where it actually has an end plate where it attaches to the disc. So each rib does that. So the mechanics of what we do for the ribs get weird. But there are some general, that's good. What I'm going to have you do first, if you just follow the space along the side of the forearm up between the two muscle masses, you're going to come to a little ridge there. There's a ridge up and then a little valley going across. And place the pad of your thumb on that valley and supinate and pronate, and you'll feel the exquisiteness of the pivot of the radial head, pivoting around the humerus, sticking down. Right? And that's what we're really sort of checking, is this relationship. And as I take her into pronation, it kind of wobbles out and sort of scoops out, so it's not symmetrical. Any kind of repetitive stress of the forearm, any kind of injury, a fall. This is the radius that runs from the elbow. If we put her into large supination in the anatomical neutral, the radius goes straight up this side of the forearm, and here it is at the wrist, right? The thumb side of the wrist, and then goes up to the elbow. When we pronate, it crosses over. And what connects all that is that big interosseous membrane, that big fiber optic cable running down to the deep palmar fascia. So this is also on the large intestine channel. But so if we're holding the arm so that it's facing straight up, and we go to the vertical aspect right over where that radial head is, kind of there, and press kind of over it, it's a spot that often, if there's an injury, it'll make somebody jump. It's sore, but it's not like exquisitely sore. Right? See where my, and you can find it in Jones's book too.
Large intestine 11.
Large LA11? Cool. So what we're doing is actually going to create a hyperextension leverage situation. We're going to actually compress the radius into the elbow. I'm going to rest my elbow, really the fleshy part of my triceps, not the bony part of my elbow. That feels really good, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're a
Go
sick
on
girl.
Spleen point there. Yes,
I'm going to drop down and kind of hyperextend here. And look what I'm doing with the wrist. So I'm taking the elbow to a place of balance, and I'm just hyperextending the wrist to where she's letting me. I'm not doing anything extreme. And then I'm deviating. Hope, don't help me. Then I'm deviating the hand and wrist toward the radius. See that?
You're also pushing up into my shoulder, right?
Well, I'm not. I mean, when I deviate into the wrist, it's creating a force that goes all the way up to her shoulder, but the leverage is starting with the hand into the wrist, and the wrist into the radius, and as the radius travels up, it gets released by the interosseous membrane and makes its way up here to the radial head, I can feel this point soften and it doesn't hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
So why do you do the extension with the hand?
Because that releases the radius too. It's part of the position. I've started from extension and I've added the appropriate radial deviation.
Still extending.
Yes, yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. So it's a combination of extension and radial deviation.
Could you do that at the beginning?
What?
Combination of what? Combination.
Combination of extension and radial deviation of the hand and wrist. Side bending. You know, but I'll just say it's bending the arm toward the hand toward the radius. And this thing just floats, and I'm watching it treat, and there's breath and flow. These are the 2 points I showed you when you started at the very beginning. Very accessible. The second point is going to be, there you see the point. Whoever's working with Amy, you can see exactly where I was. So it's easy. The second point's going to be just a little bit up and a little bit in. Right? So I'm in the crease of the elbow on the lateral aspect. There's a little bony knob there called the coronoid process. When I push on it, it's often really, really, really sore. Big points in trauma, big points in people with any kind of office-related repetitive stress injury. There's the point right there. Here's the radius point, radial head point. It's on the outside. I think it's humerus.
It's lateral?
Lateral coronoid process.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's humerus. I'd have to look and see on skeleton. I've gotten to be so myopic with this, I know where the point is. I don't care what it attaches to anymore. anatomical. The point has nothing to do with the anatomy, right? So here I am. Now, how does this point treat out? Right? It's probably humerus because of the way, because you've got the flexors coming up here from the forearm, so it's got to cross the elbow joint and attach here, so I'm assuming that's it. So we're bringing the arm up into flexion, right? And that's actually in your notes. You talk about upper extremity. You just skip the wrist. And then what I'm doing is I'm pronating. I'm rolling her hand around so her fingers are facing me. Right? So it's sort of like King Tut, walk like an Egyptian.
Here we go.
Born in Babylonia, moved to Arizona. Is that it?
Other way.
Is that the other way around?
Yeah.
I thought he did it the other way at the end, though.
Babylonia.
He's talking about how all this stuff ended up in Arizona. I don't know. I have to listen again. I used to thought it was the other way around.
Didn't you used to tuck the like fingers in and go in like that?
The King Tut?
No, and his.
Oh,
Where
so
you kind
there's
of
more
crumple
to-
the fingers in and go in like that. Is that my?
No, that was this thing.
Oh, that's a different. This is part of that. Often when there's problems in there. Now look at what I'm doing. What I'm actually doing is compressing and kind of crinkling up the interosseous membrane. So maybe this point has to do with the distortion of the interosseous membrane. But the point's gone, right?
Are you doing a compression down along the forearm?
No,
No.
no.
Just the
I'm
rotation
it's
will bring it
flexion
out.
and rotation.
Mhm.
I don't need to compress into
Yeah.
it. Nicole, relax it. There's no need to be hypervigilant here. It's
Away
pronation. We're not using, the only time we talk about toward and away is when we're dealing with spinal rotation. Now we're talking about pronation and supination. So the arm is going so it's down, right? The old people would say that when it rolls up, we're supinating so we can hold soup, right? Now we're pronating because we're facing down. And I'm flexing so that I can actually soften everything. Ouch.
You need
Possibly. It's not my elbow, it's my shoulder.
But you are rotating too.
It's pronating.
It looks like you're moving over that way.
That's a pronation. Oh.
This?
Pronation?
That would be internal
No,
rotation
pronation
of
is
humerus,
this.
and I'm not. I'm not.
like your
Okay.
feet.
And you're not
pronating
rotating
and
at the wrist
supinating.
either.
The wrist,
Right.
it looks like you're
Yeah.
rotating the wrist
This is
over.
No.
pronation.
No.
'Cause it's
Okay.
pointing
The only thing that matters, right, is what happens single right in the middle. Often when there's been a huge hyperextension injury, and all you're doing here is kind of similar for what we did with the radius head, but we're monitoring the point and just hyperextending into the point.
Something just
Something just popped in there. There's a high velocity maneuver where we'd forcibly hyperextend her and snap the.
do it.
What is that called?
We're going to call this either olecranon process. We'll call this triceps tendon. I don't know what Jones calls it. Once in a blue moon, I do this. Rare. Okay? That's the point.
So would
That's
that
what
be
you're
where
in.
the pain is, or they're just saying they're having trouble bend, like?
Yeah, that would not. That's not usually where the pain is.
Okay.
So they're having trouble straightening their arm, they're having trouble bending their elbow, they can't sleep at night because they've got this restless arm. Say, oh, look at that. You must have fallen or done something. And so I'm doing the hyperextension with them kind of in neutral. I'm not doing anything with the forearm. No, I just want to, vertical is kind of neutral, so I'm just putting them in kind of a vertical position and then hyperextending. Feels kind of good, doesn't it?
Oh, it's sideways. It's not pronating, it's like hyperextending.
What?
Okay,
It's neutral.
neutral.
Yeah.
Is the point on
In the arm, in the forearm, up and down is neutral. So I don't want to introduce either pronation or supination. I want everything as much neutrality as possible.